Welcome back to the news, everybody. Today we've got a really important story, actually. It impacts all of us, and you've probably seen headlines like this one, right? Quote, publishers are absolutely terrified that preserved video games would be used for recreational purposes. That's actually a quote. So the US Copyright Office has struck down a major effort for game preservation. That's a big headline, but do you know what's even worse? It barely begins to cover how stupid, how frustrating this entire situation is. What it is the industry dragon that is the ESA, ensuring that the business side of gaming is firmly suppressing the art side. And what makes this so ridiculous, infuriating, and absolutely malicious is the fact that 87% of video games before 2010 are no longer commercially available. So ESA, what are you hoarding? Okay, let's get into the story. To start this off, we gotta be on the same page. So here's how the whole shebang works. Every 3 years, the US Copyright Office offers the chance for changes to be made to how copyright is applied. And obviously, it's in the US, but that matters because, most of the games happen in the US. Now, in January 2024, the heroes of today's video, the Software Preservation Network, they began attempting to get their petition forward to the Copyright Office. They had two asks. These are basically tweaks to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Their first one is to allow multiple simultaneous remote users for non-game software, and their second ask to allow for remote access to video games for the purposes of research and education. So in simple terms, what they're basically saying is, hey, Copyright Office, we would like it if multiple people could check out software, non-game software, like say an application or an operating system in a remote fashion, and multiple users could do that, for academic research. And the second ask is, could people remotely access video games for academic purposes? Because, games are art. They matter, and if we look at the past, we might just learn and have better games. So here's the wild thing. Currently, libraries can preserve and distribute video games, but it's crazy the limitations. They can only physically do it with the original software and hardware, and they can't lend them. They cannot lend them, right? So a library would effectively have to maintain piles of legacy hardware. That's just not going to happen. I'll be actually blunt here. This is worse than useless. The only people who can research video games are people who live near a magical gaming library with loads of things, or that build a private collection out of pocket. And even that's kind of bad, because preservation without access is a bit like arguing that Smaug the Defiler, or whatever he was called in Tolkien, was preserving the riches of Erebor for future generations by making sure nobody else could have them. It's not preservation, it's hoarding, and while individual collectors may be really good people and lend the games out, that's not a real solution. But now for the bit that should make all of our blood boil. This restriction is not applied to any other medium, right? No other art form. Film? Nope. Television? Nope. Books? Nope. It turns out that from a legal perspective, games are uniquely punished, they are uniquely under attack. And the Software Preservation Network wants to improve this. The people who don't want to improve it are the ESA. The ESA suck. They have been long-time industry villains, and we're going to talk a lot about them today. And we're not just preserving video games, we are preserving our wrinkly gamer brains, and doing so with today's sponsor. We're going to help you transform doom-scrolling time into skills you can be proud of, and for me, that means righting a bit of a wrong from the past, actually. So, it's brilliant.org/Bellular News, and they're now for me a healthy, fulfilling habit. You see, they're all about learning by doing across thousands of lessons in maths, data science, programming, and AI, and it's all in their gorgeous site and app. And what sets them apart is how tactile and interactive everything is, which is the complete opposite of the school system that, as an example, I went through. Here's a few highlights, right? Planning a music festival by moving around light cones in a space-time diagram, which is awesome. Playing snooker to understand the rules of collision, or in their data science pathway, which will have you working with real-world data from the likes of Starbucks, Airbnb, and Spotify. And the wrong that I talked about writing is just, I ended up doing so many YouTube videos that I kind of neglected personal development, but with Brilliant, I've got that back again. And personally, I use the mobile app. I just love the layout, the illustrations, the UX, the animations are delightful. You can just feel the passion behind it, honestly, and it means that my phone is a positive object in my life, not a terrible doom-scrolling thing. So, you can turn that into a great daily learning habit today at brilliant.org/Bellular News. When you go there, you'll get 30 days for free, and then you'll get 20% off the annual plan. Time to introduce today's villain. The Entertainment Software Association, ESA, is a body that represents most major devs and publishers in America, and you may remember them from plenty of little dramas. They had an amazing one where they leaked the information, right, of all the press people from E3 signups, so that was pretty damn bad. And of course, E3 in general, they were actually running that, and they had a complete inability to make E3 a sustainable event that would work, which is insane because it's not like loads of other groups have, actually managed to do that successfully for years. No, the ESA are just useless morons. But the point is, they're not here for us. They're actually not here for video games either. They are not interested in games as a medium. To the ESA, games are an industry only, and they will have no problem suppressing the overall impact and success of video games in the long run if that means they're seen to be protecting the short-term interest of their members, because their members are not you and me. Their members are not a regular developer working at some big company. No, their members are corporate entities. So if you're an indie developer, a gamer, if you just want to do a startup, the ESA should be your friend, but they're not your friend. Now, this is why their arguments against the Software Preservation Network are so infuriating. The ESA is essentially arguing that games are not a medium worthy of academic study. Here's some words from the ruling. The ESA's lawyers contended that there would be significant risk that preserved video games would be used for recreational purposes. Oh no! They further argued that the expanded exemption would give preservation institutions too much discretion regarding how they provide remote access to preserved works, and that it did not contain appropriately tailored restrictions to ensure that uses would be limited to teaching, research, or scholarship uses. They believe that removing the premises limitation would adversely affect the existing games market for older games. So that's what the ESA had to say. The Copyright Office, of course, agreed, because I suppose that's what they would do, and they explicitly cited the idea of the market for legacy video games potentially being harmed, and then they denied the petition, meaning that for the next 3-year period, that's it, petition failed. Now, this was always going to be the ESA's defense, and in fact, in May 2024, IGN spoke to an ESA lawyer about this case because basically they saw similar arguments in 2018 and 2021. Here is what they learned, and I'll read from their reporting. The spokesperson told me that the trade group absolutely sees games as art, but also as copyrighted works. Quote, that means that universal preservation must always be balanced against the rights of copyright owners to make business decisions about the legacy market. Now, you can see how they could make that argument, but as we'll very, very soon see, it actually falls completely to pieces under scrutiny. Now, they could point to having over 2,500 games that they donated to the Library of Congress, which does mean, I suppose, that if you live in Washington, D.C., congrats, you're actually one of the few people in the country with a support network to become an ESA-approved games academic. Now, this happened in 2018, right? It failed. In 2021, it failed. But something is actually changing. In 2024, the Software Preservation Network actually came ready for combat. At the start of the video, I mentioned the 87% number, and that's from the video game availability study that was prepared in 2023, sponsored by the Software Preservation Network and the Video Game History Foundation. Now, they found that yes, 87% of all video games produced before the year 2010 are not commercially available. That is real worrying. Now, you might think of GOG, right? You can buy loads of old games there, but again, we're talking about ones that are not commercially available, so anything on GOG doesn't actually count there. But in fairness to GOG, they're trying, and they just launched a preservation program, but they can't do it alone, not even close. A pillar of the ESA's argument, right, is that publishers of games need legal protections that other art forms don't, right? And they're specifically using the legacy market. But here's the thing, 87% of legacy games before 2010 are not commercially available. So how can they say we need to protect the legacy market when the legacy market is tiny, with the vast majority of games not even being commercially available? If these were all commercially available and there was some vibrant way in which we were all just playing random games from 1997 or 2006, sure, fine. But that's not the case, because they're not commercially available. So that part of the ESA's argument absolutely falls to pieces. But what's even more concerning is the Software Preservation Network modeled their arguments based on, funnily enough, exemptions that have been granted to other mediums. So if the exemption is okay for film, for television, for books, why is it not okay for video games? And in short, those are that it would be accredited academic bodies that do the distribution, right? The idea that professional bodies are the gatekeepers. This is overtly not some sort of wink wink, nudge nudge, don't we all love sharing our peer-to-peer files that we completely own and playing them in our Plex server, perfectly above board, and don't we all manually rip ROMs from game carts that we own? Har har har, free video games. No, the SPN are literally advocating for something that is locked down and responsible because the underlying thing here that actually matters is preservation. They say this: our test is based on the Copyright Office's own proposed rules for what kinds of institutions should be recognized as a library. We don't pull this out of the air. This is the Copyright Office's proposal to define what kinds of institutions should have the special privileges that libraries and archives get in the law. So it's not fair to say that our rules are too broad, because they are not. The SPN are absolutely right. But sadly, all of this was expected following the last two attempts to get this to happen, and the way the ESA behaved during the original hearings earlier this year is telling. The ESA are not interested in studies, they are not interested in argument. Do you remember that amazing moment from the UK hearing where Electronic Arts' lawyer said the word surprise mechanics, and suddenly it turned into a great meme that we all sort of enjoyed? Well, arguments made, be they in court, to regulators in a special committee, they're often so juicy because they reveal exactly how companies think. So here's what the ESA said, as captured by Ars Technica. Quote, "I don't think there is, at the moment, any combination of limitations that ESA members would support to provide remote access," ESA lawyer Steve England said. "The preservation organizations want a great deal of discretion to handle very valuable intellectual property. They have yet to show a willingness on their part in a way that might be comforting to the owners of the IP." And I said that with the inflection that I did because that is infuriating, because these exemptions literally are there in other art forms and other mediums. And it's not like some American senator who liked to go and say, oh, games are causing the youth to be violent and all of that stuff from, the early 2000s. It's not like some boomer who hates video games is trying to clamp down on them. No, this is our industry's own body attacking the very medium, the very art form. And that just says it all, doesn't it? It's completely ridiculous. All of this is stacked against the people who are trying to change the rules in copyright, the people who actually care about games as a medium, as an art form, of something worthy of study, such that the next generation of game designers can actually have a good education and we can learn from the mistakes and the wins of this industry. The US Copyright Office will keep things the same unless there is a shift from the industry, regardless of if it's basically them contradicting their own past logic in, say, film and television. The ESA are not interested in any change here unless they are forced, and as the Software Preservation Network has proven, it's not like these companies are even using this, quote, very valuable intellectual property to make money, because 87% of games produced before 2010 are not even commercially available. They are the dragons of old myth of Tolkien. They are hoarding. They are malicious. Okay, let's bring this home. If 87% of all games don't exist in a purchasable state, then they may as well be vaporware anyway. Activision might love to drop a reference to 1982's Pitfall in a Call of Duty game, or maybe running an emulated version of one of their old games as a mini-game, but they're not selling that to anyone. I mean, one of my favorite games of all time is Freelancer, right? It's impossible to purchase Freelancer legally, and I don't have my original game discs. So if you like Freelancer, well, I'll leave you to figure out how you could resolve that problem. But it sucks. Even for the industry, it sucks. I'd pay. I would pay. It's a game that I love. But it's not just about me being able to relive a childhood game. Per the Video Games Heritage Foundation, quote, "The ESA's position forces researchers to explore extra legal methods to access the vast majority of out-of-print video games that are otherwise unavailable." I like the word extra legal. Let's just call them enhanced acquisition techniques. TLDR, researchers, academics, literally have to pirate or hunt down secondhand copies and basically say to their students, wink wink, nudge nudge, you all know where to get this. That benefits nobody, including the companies the ESA represents. And so the combined efforts of the SPN and the VGHF have completely exposed the ESA that they are acting irrationally, maliciously, and out of fear. Sadly, though, they have convinced the one government body who holds all the power. But the good news is, the fight is not over, and their framing is transparently simply wrong. And that's where I've got a banger for you. This banger comes from Brandon Butler. He's the Director of Information Policy at University of Virginia Library. Not the sort of guy that you're, used to just dropping hot bangers on us, but here's what he said. Quote, "It should also make clear to policymakers that these institutions deserve more and better tools to do their jobs because the market will not preserve our history. That is not the market's job. If we lose access to our digital cultural heritage, it is not a market failure, it is a policy failure." That's the point. The market is not the tool for every job. Sometimes policy is the right tool for the job. But what happens whenever corporate interests get their hands on policy? We lose. History loses. Art loses. So Americans, write to your representatives. The rest of us will genuinely be thankful. Oh boy, right, so policy matters, and if you want another policy-based video that will literally impact you, like right now, check out this. Valve got a new policy, and it will change how things work in Steam, and it's actually in your interests.